Sometimes a true talent will be given a character that is so bare bones they can't do anything with it. What's worse is that this issue is usually not the actor's fault. Sometimes most of a performer's scenes are cuts, meaning they barely appear in the final product. If these actors were given a character with a bit more substance, they would have had the chance to knock it out of the park. I'm Cy for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 actors who were criminally wasted in famous horror movies. Number 10. James Franco, Alien Covenant. In every sci-fi monster flick, there's always a few characters who get killed off before they have a chance to do anything. Before they say a single line or we learn their name, they get their head lopped off or are eaten by an alien. Although viewers are expecting this to happen while watching Alien Covenant, no one thought James Franco's character, Jacob Branson, would get the chop so early. Considering he was a big name at the time and was playing the ship captain, many viewers erroneously assumed that he was the lead based on the trailers and the promos. Speaking of which, Branson appears more in the promotional footage for Alien Covenant than the movie itself. In the promotional prologue, we see Branson interacting with the crew before they arrive at their destination, but in the film, Jacob is burned to death after his stasis pod malfunctions before he utters a word of dialogue. He didn't even get killed by the freaking aliens. Most likely, this was an intentional bait and switch on the audience's expectations, and in a sense, it worked. Number 9. Hiroyuki Sanada, Army of the Dead. Because Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake is so damn good, many believed Army of the Dead would follow in its footsteps. This Zomfest was hyped beyond measure, with the filmmaker discussing potential sequels, spin-offs and prequels before the movie was even released. Sadly, Army of the Dead was let down by poor camera work, dumb jokes and a nonsensical plot. On top of that, Snyder put such a heavy focus on creative action and imaginative shootouts, he forgot to give some of his characters a character. Dave Bautista plays the lead, and yet his role comes across as generic despite a tragic backstory. Sons of Anarchy's Theo Rossi may be a natural talent, but his character is so underwritten it's easy to forget that he's even in the film. But one of Army of the Dead's biggest crimes is how underused Hiroyuki Sanada is. The Japanese actor is so talented, he was the standout in The Last Samurai and Mortal Kombat, despite not speaking a word of English. Since he's playing the overarching villain in the so-called Army of the Dead universe, you'd expect him to steal the show. Sadly, he barely appears. Although Sanada oozes charm when he's on screen, we rarely get to see him. Number 8. Christopher Walken, Sleepy Hollow. Christopher Walken is a deeply gifted Oscar-winning actor who's been a part of some of the most celebrated movies of all time, including The Deer Hunter, Catch Me If You Can, Pulp Fiction, and of course, Hairspray. For nearly 70 years, the charismatic Queen's performer has been entertaining us in film and television with his enchanting performances. So when audiences learned that Walken would be playing the Headless Horseman in Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, understandably it sounded like a match made in heaven. Sadly, his talents were underutilised. Despite the fact that Walken has defined his career with clipped delivery and mesmerising monologues, all he does in this gothic adaptation is snarl. Also, the filmmakers gave him fangs to make him look scary, instead it just makes him come across as a cartoon villain. Normally, Walken can make any role work no matter how bad the script is. As he's proven in The Country Bears and Mouse Hunt, he'll make his character memorable even if the rest of the movie is garbage. But here he has nothing to do except look menacing. If you're hoping for another scene-stealing performance from Walken while watching Sleepy Hollow, you'll be disappointed. Number 7. Tony Todd, Final Destination 3. Final Destination follows a group of people who narrowly avoided being killed in a plane crash. Although they believe they got lucky, a mortician called William Bloodworth informs the survivors they must pay a price for upsetting the balance between life and death. Because they cheated death, the Grim Reaper will come for each of them to collect their souls by any means necessary. Even though it's a bit of an exposition dump when Bloodworth divulges this information, the movie gets away with it since the character is portrayed by Tony Todd. Due to his effortless menace and smouldering voice, Todd can make the dumbest dialogue sound riveting. Fans loved Todd's performance so much, Bloodworth returned in the sequels. But when it came to Final Destination 3, it was obvious the writers had no idea what to do with him. After they failed to find a way to implement Bloodworth into the story, they instead had Todd provide the voiceover of a carnival ride. This role is so insultingly minimal, it would have been better not to cast Todd in the first place. Number 6. Donald Pleasance, Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. Like most horror franchises that don't know when to quit, nearly every entry in the Halloween series gets progressively worse. Although the original was a phenomenon that popularised the slasher subgenre, it wasn't long before John Carpenter's work devolved into a schlocky mess. In fact, one of the only redeemable aspects in the sequels is Donald Pleasance's performance as Michael Myers' doctor, Sam Loomis. Even though the films are filled with bad acting and laughable storylines, Pleasance always takes it seriously, giving some much-needed gravitas to the story. The way he speaks about the unspeakable evil that harbours within Michael Myers is so alluring, you can momentarily forget how awful these movies are. Unfortunately, Pleasance died immediately after the studio behind Halloween 6 decided to reshoot half of the film. Because it was impossible to reshoot with Pleasance, Dr. Loomis barely appears in the final cut. Worse still, he's killed off screen. Considering Dr. Sam Loomis is among Pleasance's most defining characters and Halloween 6 was among the last features he worked on, it's a massive shame he barely featured. Number 5. Vera Farmiga, Annabelle Comes Home. For the past decade, it seems like nearly every studio has been trying to emulate Marvel's interwoven web of films. However, the only series to come close to maintaining a consistent shared universe is The Conjuring. With 8 installments so far and more on the way, it's clear James Wan has forged a solid foundation for his paranormal franchise. Although Wan and the screenwriters have to be commended, Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, who portray Ed and Lorraine Warren, have been crucial in keeping this supernatural series grounded in reality. Every time one of the films is about to fly off into the deep end, our lead stars keep everything in check with their sincere and compelling performances. But when it comes to the spin-off sequel, Annabelle Comes Home, not even Farmiga's talent can save it. Not only is this unnecessary follow-up shoddily written, Farmiga is barely in it. The story focuses on a completely different character, with the Warrens only appearing in the opening scene and epilogue. If you attempted to watch Annabelle Comes Home just to see Vera Farmiga, don't bother. Number 4. CARY ELWES, Saw 3D, The Final Chapter. Since fans saw CARY ELWES' Dr. Lawrence Gordon hack his foot off and crawl away in the climax of Saw, many were eager to see him return in a sequel. But due to a lawsuit against the producers, CARY ELWES parted ways with James Wan's career-defining franchise. But fans refused to accept Gordon was gone. According to ELWES, they were writing to me, writing to the producers, and blogging about it forever, asking what happened to Dr. Gordon. Ultimately, ELWES agreed to return for Saw's final installments, which the filmmakers thought would be a nice way to bookend the series. So when it was decided that Saw 3D would be the franchise's closing chapter, at least for the time being, audiences worldwide were eager to see Dr. Gordon make his glorious return after a 6-year hiatus. Sadly, Gordon is only in the film for 5 minutes. Despite the fact his reveal as Jigsaw's secret apprentice in the climax is meant to be a big twist, most people's reaction is, oh yeah, totally forgot you were in the movie. Even though Gordon's return was hyped beyond measure, he barely made an impression. Number 3. DJIMON HOUSOU, A Quiet Place Part 2. A genuinely solid sequel is rare, and when it comes to horror, decent sequels are almost non-existent. So even though A Quiet Place was among the most innovative horror films over the past decade, moviegoers were unsure if the sequel could live up to expectations. But for the most part, A Quiet Place Part 2 does a fine job at developing key characters from the predecessor while still ramping up the horror elements. The only place where this follow-up really falters is the ending. Upon their travels, Emmett and Reagan discover there's a colonised island nearby that hasn't been invaded by extraterrestrials. When they reach the island, they encounter the colony's leader, played by DJIMON HOUSOU. Although this character is introduced in the third act, you'd assume HOUSOU had the chops to make his role stand out. At least, he would have if he had the chance. Before we learn anything about the leader or see him talk about the colony, he's killed by an alien. Although HOUSOU is a natural talent, the Beninese actor has nothing to work with here. His character is so paper thin, he doesn't even have a name. Considering HOUSOU is a 2-time Oscar nominee, he deserved better. Number 2. Christopher Lee, Dracula, Hammer series. With over 200 films under his belt and a career spanning 70 years, Christopher Lee is among the most prolific actors to ever live. Despite playing many iconic characters such as Saruman, Sherlock Holmes, Count Dooku, etc., he's best known for playing Dracula. While working with Hammer Studios, the London-born actor portrayed the Transylvanian Count 7 times. His performance as the titular character in 1958's horror of Dracula was so mesmerising, it helped Hammer Studios become a cinematic powerhouse. However, Lee is completely wasted in every Dracula film save for the original for one reason: he has no lines. To ensure Lee was paid as little as possible, he was given minimal or zero dialogue in all the Dracula sequels, despite being the titular character. Now, because Lee has such an effortless presence, you could argue that he could command any scene he appears in, even without speaking. Sadly, Dracula appears in each sequel for approximately 10 or 15 minutes. Although Lee should be playing the lead, the sequels had him relegated to a glorified cameo. Number 1. Michael Biehn, Aliens 3. Because Colonel Dwayne Hicks was one of the few people to survive to the end of Aliens, it looked like Michael Biehn's character would play a big role in the sequel. In fact, Hicks would be the protagonist of Alien 3 if the studio went with William Gibson's initial script. Sadly, the Terminator actor couldn't have known Aliens 3 would undergo one of the most problematic productions in the history of cinema. $7 million was wasted on unused sets, over half a dozen scripts were considered before being tossed out, and directors were hired and fired routinely. After languishing in development hell for years, Alien 3 was finally entirely good to go. Unfortunately, the script that the studio went with had Hicks killed off in the prologue. Although being expected to play the hero, he only appeared as a pixelated photograph in the opening sequence. He didn't spend one day on set, he didn't have a single line. If you blinked for too long while watching this scene, you would miss his entire quote-unquote performance. When you watch this moment, it's clear that Bean wasn't just wasted, he was screwed over. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below, and let us know of any other actors that you feel like were criminally wasted in horror movies. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for What Culture, and have a good week.